So I think everyone is back, and what we are going to do now, as if you have not heard enough from me or seen enough of me already, we are going to move into our next session, and it's with everyone in the room. So I would ask that you, excuse me, keep yourself muted. And again, I hope that those were really lively conversations. I was really blown away by our time together. So now, deep breath and resettle ourselves, resettle myself. I'm going to lead this next discussion, and it's a session called Event Policy Analysis: How Communities Can Build Power Through Charting Our Work. So that's a lot of words. I will share my screen in a second, but let me just say what we're going to do and how we are going to spend our time together. In our time together, we are going to talk about how charting your work, mapping the work that you are doing, can build confidence and can make us realize that, and so many people have said this, and you have said this and taught me this, even in our time together, that we have the power to determine what happens in our communities. And it's not so complicated. There are lots of things that will try to make it hard, but it's not so complicated to do. So let's get started. And I am going to share my screen. Hold on. Okay. So hopefully there we go. So and here are kind of the 5 questions that we are going to work through during our time together. What is policy? What is this policy event analysis? How can it build power? How can it create change? And how will you celebrate and win? And how will you keep going? So let's take on that first one, and then I am going to show you a diagram. But these are the questions that I'm going to address. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that we can go back to see each other. Okay, so let's tackle that first question. What is policy? So the word policy can seem like a really heavy thing. So often I think we think about policy as like a piece of legislation, right? That like policy is some official declaration, or it's like an act of Congress or the city council. So when those of us working in communities imagine that we might be changing policy, it can seem really overwhelming. I know it, as an organizer, it has seemed overwhelming to me at times. But policy is not only legislation, right? Policy is anything that determines how we live. Policy can also be the absence of cultural recognition. It can be the absence of rules or behaviors that do not exist or are not regulated to keep us safe in a way that is meaningful to us. Policy can be as simple as somebody saying, oh, no, you can't put a community stage there because nobody has done that before, right? That can be a policy that's imposed, or we want to change the way that wall is used by creating a community mural. That's a policy. That is something that you want to do that changes the current environment. Those are policies. And how do we know we are gaining traction and movement? How do we know that we are taking the right steps or steps towards creating change? So let's talk about this concept of what is policy event analysis. So I know that for everyone here doing work and creating change in your communities, like you had to start somewhere, right? What was that first step? What are all the things that you did to create the change you wanted to achieve? Was it effective? Were there things you could have done differently? Are there times that you thought an action was minor, but if you gave it some real reflection, you realize a small action really led to big change? So that is policy event analysis. And we're going to look at a diagram in a second. The event is each individual action you took. And I'll get to why this is important. A meeting with your fellow residents is a policy event. If we go back to what does policy actually mean? Getting a meeting with your council person is a policy event. Writing an article for a paper is a policy event. Holding a dance on that super colorful dance floor that we saw in the video, that is a policy event. And if you write all of those events down and really map them out, you can get a much clearer sense of what it took and what it will take to create change, so you don't always have to start from scratch. You can really see, which we will do in a minute, what worked, what didn't, what relationships and partnerships you need. It gives you a real sense of what you can achieve and what power you already have. That is event policy analysis. So there are 4 more questions here. How does event policy analysis and mapping out your work build power? How can it create change? How will you celebrate and win? And how do you keep going? So I want to start to begin to answer those questions by looking at a diagram. But first, let me say this. So often, in doing community work, we have a goal and we keep having meetings and we keep coming up with plans and we go, and we don't really pause to say, hey, look at how far we've come. Sometimes because we don't think that we have time to do that. But taking the time to do that builds power. It allows us to come together to really look at all the momentum we are building, and it helps us get unstuck sometimes when that momentum slows down. Tracking and mapping your work, really seeing it all in front of you, allows you to have control of the narrative of your work. And that has come up a couple of times today, how important it is that communities and people own their own narrative. Because you get to decide how you are going to describe who you are, who your community is, and what you're doing. So many times, outsiders, people not from the community, tell the story of a community, and so many times they get it wrong. Charting your work allows you to create your own narrative, and that is powerful. That by itself creates policy change. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. And let's look at this kind of wonky diagram. That's just an example, okay? This is just an example. I'll make it a little bigger and we'll move around, but I will try very hard not to make you all seasick. So I actually took what I heard a little bit from the Bushwick video. And one of the things that was said is that we want to grow food. We want an urban farm. We want to produce our own food. That's policy. That is a policy change because it is a shift in what exists. So that is in the center of this diagram, right? We want an urban farm. So if that's the goal, kind of what are all the events? And this is just a small example of what will lead to that change. What have you already done that is getting you closer to that goal. When you write all of those events down, when you chart your work, you are building power within your community to see that it is possible to get there because you have already done all of these things. Did you know? So let's just look at this. What are some of the things? And again, this is a map that I created, right? So I'm not saying that these are things that have happened already. I just want to use it as an example. To do this in community with your fellow residents, take the time to really write down all the things that you've done that are going to lead you to the next thing. So what we want an urban farm. Okay, well, we have health data from DOHMH. That's a policy event. Having those data is a policy event. We created a resident-led group that built trust, and a working group we know is coming. Those are policy events. We transformed a space. We turned an empty lot into a multi-use community space. Residents therefore feel safe and connected. We met with Green City Force, right? Maybe you met with Domingo. We met with resident leaders at NYCHA farm sites. There are already farms on public housing developments, which many of you know. That is a policy event. We're creating new partnerships. We're identifying funders. We held 4 events. We have relationships with city government. All of these things are policy events. But did you know that you were already on the way to creating this? Doesn't that feel powerful? It feels powerful to know that you have already done all of these things. And now when someone asks, I'm going to stop sharing. Excuse me. Now when someone asks, well, you know, that seems really, really hard. I mean, where are you going to find the land? Are you even allowed to do that? Will people really eat the food? Is there a group pushing for that? Do you have the relationships? You can say yes. And don't have to like purge and search your mind. You can say yes. We have built trust. We have held events. It is very powerful and confidence building to do this in your communities with each other. And it also lets you know what you haven't done yet. And you can claim that too. And that is powerful. So you are the ones to say, I know we have things that we haven't done yet. So let's go back to those questions, the last 2 questions. How will you celebrate and win? And how will you keep going? Now, when you chart your work, every policy event you accomplish is a win. Everything is a win. Everything that you have done is a win. You can see it right in front of you because it is building on so many things. The work is hard. You can feel exhausted. So celebrating each event, each milestone is crucial. It allows you to say, yes, we did that. And it allows the community to say, yes, we did that, and it was hard. And I think so often as organizers, which all of you are, we are not often invited to take time to be reflective. And being reflective is as much a part of community organizing as being active. Being reflective, owning your power, knowing where you want to go. So how will you keep going? We know that change doesn't happen overnight, but some things can. You can paint something a different color from yesterday and it will be different today. And so often we feel like, or if we don't feel like, we are told that we have to wait for permission for change, but we don't. You know that, I've heard that here today. By charting your work, it really allows you to see where you started and what you have accomplished, and that will keep you going. Naming and claiming every single thing, every event you do will keep you going. Did you add 5 residents to your group? Chart it. write it on a Post-it note, stick it up on your wall. There's something about seeing it that makes a difference. No event is too small. Go back to this exercise again and again, and it will keep you going. So finally, I'm taking some time off of the presentation to reclaim our time, to quote Maxine Waters, to give us some more time back. But I just want to conclude by saying that, you know, I think policymakers, not always, but can make the process of change seem like really heavy. Like the only way to create change is if you actually change an actual rule. But we know that that's not true. Change happens every day in community. And the thing is, and I wish I had my bag with me, but I'm a firm believer that you can change the rule or change the world with communities and residents and like a Ziploc bag full of Post-it notes and magic markers. Like that's kind of like all you need. And so I encourage you, all of you, as you move into the next phase of this work, which will be working groups, to really start by charting out all the work that you have done, calling those policy events, claim that word policy, you claim that word policy, and that is power, and building off of the power that you already have.